Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Ms. Solaris BlueRaven. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is Mary Rodwell. And Mary Rodwell is the founder and principal of the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, ACERN. ACERN offers professional counseling support, hypnotherapy, and information to individuals and their families who have anomalous paranormal experiences, particularly abduction contact experiences. Mary is recognized as one of Australia's leading researchers in the UFO and contact phenomenon. She is also vice president of the Star Kids Project Limited Advisory Committee. In addition, Mary is the author of Awakening, How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life, and the producer of the EBE award-winning documentaries, Expressions of ET Contact. And Mary, how are you?
Due to some technical issues with recording the first portion of Hyperspace, we will be joining the interview in progress between Solaris and Mary Rodwell.
When you say what started me off on this amazing journey down the rabbit hole, as I call it, was Ellis. Ellis and his story, which I took to advanced counselling, and what was fascinating there, where you've got, a uniting minister and you've got social workers and clinical psychologists, and you use this as a case study, which is what I did, which was a bit scary, to be honest. But by doing so, because I felt that everything he was saying was credible, because I'd, worked with him, and there was no doubt that this gentleman was telling me his truth. He was, articulate, as I say, and intelligent. There was the fact the whole family were experiencing this, not just one person. I felt very confident that they would at least, listen and honor the case study. What was fascinating was, though, Solaris, that what it did was every one of them started to tell me about unusual experiences they had, which was fascinating to me because, what I'd basically done is give them an opening to start sharing some of the weird and wonderful things that they've actually experienced. And what I discovered was that, there are so many people that are having unusual experiences but never talk about it because there's never a safe place to actually talk about it. So that in itself showed me that this was far bigger than I ever believed.
Mm-hmm. Certainly sounds like it. And can you define some of the paranormal experiences, some of the things that really stand out insofar as these experiences are having?
Well, there's such a broad range to contact. And unfortunately, in many countries, and even and obviously in America too, all that ever seems to go on the news is the abduction scenario. And this abduction scenario is the standard Whitley Strieber, waking up at night, being aware there's presences around or feeling there's presences around. Bright lights, perhaps ringing tones, high-pitched sounds, and feeling you're being taken somewhere. Mm-hmm. And then maybe being aware that some procedure or whatever may have happened, and then you're back in your bed, and often being quite terrified. That is the only kind of contact scenario that most people in the public are aware of. What they don't realize is that that's only about 30% of those that come and contact me. Mm-hmm. The others feel quite different about their contacts, and it's a lot more subtle, it's a lot more gentle. And they are people I call the starseeds, or although they're all starseeds in my book, mm-hmm. Because if you're having contact for whatever reason, you're connecting with, what I call our star family. And these are ones that always have felt different, never felt they've really belonged. They will say, my body has always felt too dense. I feel I've got abilities and I don't know what they are, but I know that I've got, I have abilities. Some of them are very psychic. They will see spirits. They will see energies. They will be, some of them are even able to tap into thought. They often have dreams of the future, for example. Many of them are drawn into healing. They feel they've got a mission or a purpose. They struggle with how humanity behaves. They don't feel connected, almost like they've been adopted by their own family because they don't always feel the same as everyone else in their family. Mm-hmm. And many of them say, I'm here because I've got something to do. And actually, I feel like my family's out there. It's not actually on this planet. Those are what I call the more awake starseeds that are aware of their contact with their non-human family.
So it's almost like they have pseudo families here on Earth, and actually their real celestial homeworlds are off planet.
Absolutely. And many of them say, I feel like I've been dumped down here in this primitive planet and I really don't like it. And I'd much rather, leave.
Right.
But all of them seem to feel that they have a job to do, and some of them say they know what it is. Some say that they don't know what it is, but they feel like it's almost time locked, and at some point they'll know what that is. When you've got an 8-year-old, as I spoke to not so long ago, who told me that he communicates with animals, and that his mission, if you like, what he understands as his mission is to help humans understand animals and how we are connected to everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's very philosophical. It also reminds me of old souls, and of course, off-world star beings obviously do have souls, right? Absolutely.
I mean, there is a great fear of I call it a human paranoia for anyone that's different, anyone who experiences anything different. I mean, let's face it, we still haven't got over, judging people because they've got a different color skin or different color hair to us, or, they're even not as what we would consider more beautiful or less beautiful. I mean, for goodness sake, when are we going to actually realize that what's really matters is what's inside and that person inside? And I think that we are going to be really challenged to accept that on this planet there are many forms of human. There are humans that, really do connect to their star family. Some of them call themselves hybrids. And they feel very different in that sense, but some have this sort of dual consciousness where they feel part human, part ET. This is what's I believe humanity is shifting, it's changing, it's becoming more aware, and many of these that feel part of the connection to their star family feel they're here to help humanity in general evolve. So that is the mission, that is the purpose.
That makes perfect sense to me. Also, it's almost like the natural ascension process of awakening to one's higher self, oversoul, whatever you want to call it, which actually merged into those celestial energies. But what is your take insofar as transhumanism goes, and how does that affect the star child? Or is it a connection, or is there a connection?
I think it's all connected. Unfortunately, my sense is that we're trying to judge something or assess it through the eye of a needle. And because of that, we don't have all the information. So we make these very limited judgments. There is no doubt that there is evidence to suggest that we are changing as a species. And I believe that the exponential increase in such conditions, so-called conditions, as ADD, ADHD, Asperger's, some forms of autism, for example, are actually leading us into new programs for humanity, that they're not dysfunctions in a true sense. They're more new programs to help us move from an old limited paradigm into a new multidimensional paradigm.
I agree with that also. Yeah, multidimensional consciousness, without a doubt. And how would you define a star child? What separates a star child from, say, a regular child?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And what I would like to just quote very briefly is something that Tracy Taylor actually told me about how she understood it from her perspective of being a starseed. She said this: there's a race of beings on this planet, visually and physically, no different to most humans. They're here to guide the awakening of terrestrial consciousness. The conscious awareness of the new children can override the dominant conditioning and programming which occurs from birth. They have superior mental and analytical capabilities. They link directly to the subconscious and superconscious and have an innate connection to the universe, balanced by spiritual understanding. And they have enhanced DNA, which contains tenfold the amount of information. Everything is accelerated, and they can recognize foreign organisms and turn them into nutrients and enhance bodily functions. So she's basically saying that this is, it really is an upgrade in terms of our DNA. Certain parts of our DNA will be switched on, which at the moment, for many of what we would call the old model, needs these switched on, if you like going from an old Amstrad computer to a modern computer.
Right, exactly. And is there any way for that to be maybe switched off by parties that don't want the ascension process?
Absolutely. And that is a really interesting one that's come up a number of times. And one of the ladies that I've been working with, who is actually, she's got impressive credentials. She's actually got a PhD in molecular toxicology and a bachelor degree in biochemistry. And she was actually saying that there's on the planet now, she sees as two different frequencies of human, the lower frequency people and the higher frequency people. And what she believes is happening through many, many different ways, we're being kept to the lower frequency. And that goes with certain of the foods that we're eating now, chemtrails, programming in school programming. As one little 9-year-old starseed told me from Northern Europe, Mary, when these children go to school, that she said they have this innate knowledge, but what that does through the school programming, it extinguishes their light. In other words, it shuts them down. And all these different ways, and I'm sure your listeners are aware enough to know there are many different ways now that we're being shut down through all sorts of things, from drugs to programming, to, even obviously the television. Every way that we can be accessed via different frequencies can shut us down.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I see that also on the planet. That's what makes me wonder where these children can go insofar as having a support group, or also even a school system that supports their special abilities.
Interestingly, she and many others say now that there's many children that can be homeschooled, the better, because that way they still have an opportunity to retain their information and their knowledge. And there are those within all the more aware communities that are doing their best to do that, including starting up even little collections of families where they're homeschooling them, or creating a new kind of simple school system that allows these starseeds to really grow and really express their true understanding and their true nature. What we have to understand is that these children, as we see them, although they're physically children, are here to teach us, not the other way around. And if we allow them to express themselves and to actually teach us what we need to know, then everything can change from that. And this 9-year-old told me even her younger brother is going to be her teacher when he gets older, even though at the moment he's only a little toddler. So they are very aware. They are very aware who has the information, who has the knowledge. And she actually said through an interpreter, Mary has big ears. And her mother laughed when she heard that. And I said, well, what does that mean? And apparently her mother, who translated it, said, it means that Mary listens and most adults don't.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, they are switched on, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And that's fascinating. And these star children, obviously they're engineered in some way. What is the species that's engineering or modifying the DNA? Do you know?
I think there's multiple species, to be honest. And, when you've got a little boy who's 8 years old telling you that his family is the mantid, which is like an insect-like mantid type looking being, who is his family, who is teaching him, for example, that is one of the beings that seems to be coming up more and more. That's I think they're master geneticists, from what I understand as well. You've got those that mention the Pleiades, the Arcturians, Andromedans. There's a whole range of different star systems being brought into this, as well as what one young lady called the energy beings, light beings, a lot of the what we call the interdimensionals as well. So it seems to be a cosmic cooperation, and a lot of the zetas or the greys, and there's many, many different types of those, which is hard for perhaps the average person to understand. I was told there are at least 165 species of grey. So when we pick out a grey and say that represents the species, it's like picking out one human and saying, okay, so that represents all humans. So we've really got to understand that this is an effort, a cooperative effort, and it's not just about now. We've been interacting with many of these species right from the beginnings of our own origins, when we became Homo sapiens sapiens. And all of that is, from my understanding, is we have perhaps input from many of these species, and some suggest even as many as 12 of the species is in our own makeup, our human Homo sapien makeup.
Yeah, I believe that's fascinating information. And what is your impression of the Black Projects? Do they have anything to do with these children at all? Are they interfering in any way or cloning in any way? Do you have any insight on that?
I'm sure that you do know that that's exactly what we understand of a lot of the black projects, that they have technology to do a lot of the things now that we know that the star visitors or the ETs are doing. And this is everything from cloning right through to super soldier type projects as well, where they are very aware of these children's abilities. And I've been working with a gentleman who was part of this. He's now in his late 30s, and he's recovered a lot of his memories. And he remembers at 7 or 8 being in these underground bases, being taught how to walk through solid objects. So, they are very aware of the abilities, and they're looking for these children. I mean, I remember very recently an email from a young teenager saying, Mary, the reason I'm contacting you and not someone in my own country is because they're looking for me. And if they, because he has information to create new technologies to actually clear up the planet's pollution problems. And he also has told me that he knows how to build spacecraft. And I said to him, is this a download, or are you learning this on the craft? And he said, no. He said, this is a past life memory. That's what I used to do in a past life. And I'm just bringing those memories back and, to build. And he says, and I can do this. But, they are very aware that they're being looked for, as is that 9-year-old girl. And that's why I say Northern Europe, because it's a very broad brush, and there's no way you're going to know who this young person is because of that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it seems like they do need a sanctuary without a doubt. It almost reminds me of like an X-Men or something like that, with all this. And do they have the screen memories too? I mean, do you feel like that maybe they have deliberate, it sounds like that one person obviously had some screen memories or something there to distract them from remembering what they were really doing or where they were with these underground areas, or?
Do you mean screen memories with the ones that have the mylab, the military?
Right, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, I'm absolutely certain of that. I mean, all the things that, are put on the ETs, for example, I know that Dr. Stephen Greer reckons that a lot of these most traumatic ET interactions are actually not mylab. They're not true ET experiences as such. And I have found the most traumatized individuals generally have a mylab component to their experiences, because we know that there are programmed life forms on these bases. And Miles Johnson speaks about this on bases, and others that I've spoken to that have had mylab experiences, that they will come across a grey, but it's almost like they are, there's a different energetic signature to a programmed life form cloned grey than there is to a real Zeta, or same with some of the others, reptilian species. There's programmed life forms that are reptilian, and there is a different energetic signature and a coldness to these programmed life forms, and they are brought in to convince the individual who is being drugged and traumatized that these are the real deal, rather than in fact they're being programmed by our own species, which is very hard for most people to get a handle on, Solaris, as you well know. Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to believe your fellow man would do such a thing. And I agree with you with that. I think they are simulating signatures, energetic signatures, to replicate something. I feel like it's almost electronic when it comes to the underground bases versus a true celestial, high frequency, high vibrational frequency vibration from an off-world species. That's my take anyway. But I do know how they modify too, and it's nice to kind of hear you listen to you as a sounding board for a lot of this information, because I really resonate with it for sure. And you said that a lot of teenagers have been coming forward before we were on air, and just curious insofar as, so what's sparking their interest? Are they just starting to remember, or what's happening with that?
Oh, a lot of them seem to start to remember around about 7 or 8 years old, their true origin and where they're from. And I've got a number now of those in their teenage years or their early 20s that are coming forward and telling me about their understanding of their origins. And they mention why they're here. Some of them mention past lives where one young man mentioned the fact that he was in the Great War, as he called it. I don't know exactly the time period, but that was when Mars was a civilization rather than, the way it is now. And he said that was when Mars got devastated and there was a war for planet Earth. between, he said to me, the I think he said the Pleiadians and the Arcturians and others against what he called the Reptilians. And the whole thing was that from the Great War, in fact, the Reptilians won basically control over Earth. He said what's happening now is that the only way the Reptilians can control Earth is by keeping us at this very low frequency. It is the only way they can actually control humanity. As we raise our frequency, then they lose control. And this is why there's all these different mechanisms, he said to me, to actually keep us in these lower frequencies, from, poor food, from the drugs, from all the things I mentioned, from chemtrails to drugging ADD children. All these kinds of things are actually ways of keeping humanity in a low frequency. But many now are actually rising above that. And these new children coming in seem to be, what's interesting about ADHDs is they're hard to program. And that was the clue for me is, unless they get stuck with Ritalin, you can't control them. You can't program them in the same way. And that is, I think, deliberate, because it's harder to program a child. Then they can actually continue to, if you like, operate from that other knowing that they have. And Neil Gold wrote a book, Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind. And he told me when he was younger that he saw reality differently. And that was the clue. Okay, so if they're seeing reality differently, what kind of reality are they seeing? And many of these, from the certain types of autism, certain types of Asperger's and what have you, actually are very psychic. They are able to see spirits, they're able to see energies, they are able to see the truth, they're able to perceive when people are lying, all these kinds of abilities. But because we don't understand, we misjudge that and say it's something to do with faulty genes, or they've got something wrong with them, or all this kind of stuff. And actually, I think it's the reverse. I think they are actually showing us a new way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're online for sure. That's unfortunate that they've been, I think society in general has been dumbed down to some degree. So it's really almost a challenge for people to kind of bypass all the programming that's been man-made and then go beyond to their celestial programs, which are really what it's about. But yeah, that's really interesting about the 7 and 8 year olds having those memories. And also with these reptilians, what is the lineage of the reptilian race? Where do they really come from? Does anybody really know?
Oh, I think there's 101 theories. And, it's really hard because we're only operating and judging from a very limited source base. And for me, it's mostly experiential. And look, I've had people that have had interactions with reptilians that have been really negative. And I've had those that have had certain interactions where they've been actually very loving and very positive. Barbara Lamb's one of those that had a very crop circle researcher and also working in the same field as myself. And she told me of an amazing experience where she once went into her home, into a lounge room, and there was standing a 7 to 8 foot reptilian being. And all she felt from this being was love. And she said it was the most amazing experience. So I think we just have to be really careful about our limited judgment of any of these intelligences. That those that have had difficult experiences with greys, others have had loving, compassionate, wonderful experiences and feeling very connected to different zetas and greys and what have you. So it's a really confusing picture, and everyone that I get that seems to have a sense of whether it's the reptilians or the mantid or different humanoids or whatever. All I can go from is looking at the patterns of their experience and see how many come up with their understanding and see if that fits with others. And that's about the only way I can get a sense of what this may be all about. But I don't think anyone truly knows, Solaris. I think we just don't have the information.
I agree. Yeah, well, I do understand the frequency fence, and I understand that there's definitely forces that oppose higher consciousness. And I just leave it at that because I hate to pinpoint certain races or species because there are so many. But at the same time, what do you think, or are there more cases of star children now than in the past, or is it just that we're doing more research in this area?
I think that they've been coming in all through history, and I think certain very beautiful souls that that we look back on that have brought in very spiritual new ways of living I think we're all star seeds. What I think is happening now, though, is because we've reached such a technological age where we are in a place where we could actually destroy ourselves. And this is when there was so much of an exponential increase in the sightings of craft being making themselves more visible in our skies. And actually, you know, when the military got to know more and more about this going on, I think what my sense is, and what I've heard from, you know, testimony and experiences, is that they have had to really work extra fast to upgrade humanity in a very, very speedy way, because of the fact that, you know, they're saying that when we explode a nuclear bomb, this affects not just us, but the dimensions and them as well. So that it's almost like at the moment there's a 3-year-old with a loaded gun that doesn't know that it can kill. And what I think is happening is we're having a very fast upgrade so that we can actually reach a consciousness and an awareness that we can understand exactly what's going on in our multidimensional world, rather than this limited third dimensional one, where we're only seeing a very small part of the picture of actually what reality consists of. And so I think that this is why they're coming in lots of different ways. I mean, there are things, you know, there are from those that believe they're hybrids, to those that have dual consciousness, to those that feel they've come in human form from their star families. Walk-ins are another part of this, where people have told me that they walked into a human body at a certain age and they were aware that they've come in with a job to do. One lady told me that she remembers being on a cylindrical craft, 9 foot tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, telepathic. She never needed to eat because all her nutrients were absorbed through the skin. And she said the next thing she remembers being in a 3-year-old girl's body and having to learn how to talk, having to learn how to eat, and was being told that she's here to, if you like, report on what it's like to be human, but also what's going on the planet. So she regularly goes astrally to her star family and reports about what's going on the planet. And she calls herself a bit like an undercover agent in terms of, this is what's going on, this is what needs, you know, so that they can make decisions on how best to raise the frequency and the awareness of humanity. And I believe she's one of many as well. So there's lots of different ways. And also there are actually ETs walking amongst us. And I've been told this a number of times, that you wouldn't know the difference between ourselves and them, because they're humanoid and they are part of, again, giving the star nations, as we call them, or the galactic community, or whatever name you want to give them, an understanding of what's happening on this planet from a number of levels. And that makes absolute sense to me, because when this 8-year-old told me that, you know, they go to other universes and they seed other planets, they know how to, if you like, monitor and work with the consciousness of whatever species they are assisting to grow and experience on any particular planet.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like I'm sure you're familiar with soul extensions also, and soul dissension work. I don't know if you are. I suspect you are. But that's an aspect of us that exists on a simultaneous level in another dimension or universe or star system. And soul extensions are just that. They come from other extended parts of the universe. And when you receive a soul extension connecting in, it descends into the body, and they call that a soul dissension. And that's part of our celestial heritage also. So there's so many components to the matrix of what we exist in, this what I call a spacesuit. It's really fascinating information. And this research, this work you're doing is so important on this timeline right now, Mary. I'm very, very pleased to know you're doing this work. It's really needed. It's I can't express that any more than I have. It's just really important. So thank you for doing that, for sure.
I think, Solaris, for me, when you have individuals that contact you, and it is very humbling when they have actually got to a point where they just feel they can't cope on this planet anymore, that they feel so alienated by the behavior, what they see and what they feel. And because they're hypersensitive to energies, and they can feel and sense what's going on the planet itself. Many of them have said, look, you know, I was at the point where I wanted to leave, and literally at the point where, I mean, I remember one very profound email where a lady said to me, "You've saved my life." And I didn't know what she meant until I read the email. And she said, "I heard you talking on one of these radio shows just at a point when I was about to end it." And she said, and I thought, at last somebody understands, somebody knows, you know, what I feel like, and I'm not alone after all. And the isolation that is felt by so many star seeds, because they think it's just them, because they're afraid to talk about it, because they are fearful of judgment and discrimination. So that continues to give them this feeling of isolation and lack of understanding. And just knowing they're not the only ones on the planet, there are others there. And ultimately, you know, there will be a time where more and more will be coming out and saying, hi, look, I'm here, let's connect. And when we start doing that, then I think things will really start to shift. So this is why I do all of these interviews. It's one reason and one reason only, because if that reaches just one person that's in fear, in isolation, and feeling desperate because they feel they can't cope anymore, then it's worth it to me.
Oh, absolutely. It's a new fabric on a higher level of consciousness, and it's very, very important. And just like anything else, you know, when you have certain gifts or abilities or experiences, and I know a lot of people get laughed at and mocked, you know, with contactees and this and that, and it's so valid. I mean, their experiences are so valid that it's a disservice when people just judge without really doing the research and understanding what the bigger picture is. And sometimes you wonder if it's programming or if they're just plain dumbed down. But once again, yeah, your presence alone, doing radio, being out there, and so that people can hear and listen to what you have to communicate is so important. And I think that's one of the reasons I do radio also, is to try to get the information out there and get these wonderful beings like you on to communicate this information, because it's very, very important right now on this timeline. And with that being said also, do you think this planet is going through any kind of a void?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, to me, it feels like what they call like a Kali rift, a dark side. Like we're going through a very dark space through the illusion of space right now. And this is why a lot of we're seeing a lot of upheaval on the world, or a lot of what I would see, a lot of control, a lot of push for control and manipulation. I was just wondering what your take is, if you've noticed a transition of more of a heavy density in opposition to all of this light consciousness.
My feeling is, from what I'm sensing myself on this planet, is that we're in a kind of transition state. It's almost, you know, I call it, you know, they used to call it the dark night of the soul, is that, you know, just before you transition into a new awareness, a new understanding, an awakening to something new, is that point where everything is dark, everything is black, everything is heavy. And I think there are forces on this planet that are doing their best to keep us in that space of fear, that space of control where, you know, it feels hopeless. And I know that there are many of those that contact me saying, Mary, it's really hard being here now. You know, part of me just doesn't want to be here anymore. I feel the energy of the planet. I feel its darkness. I feel the fear, all those kinds of things. And I think that this is in a preparation for something where things are going to shift. Sometimes we have to have as a species, we have to feel like our backs against the wall before we make changes, before we actually start to say this is enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is exactly what's happening now, that our backs against the wall. People are waking up and seeing what's going on now, and they're seeing they're finally seeing what they didn't maybe see 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And this awakening is what is part of this transition that at the moment still feels very dark. But I think they're also aware that they have a role for when things actually change, when everybody sees the truth of what's going on. And that's the feeling of I think, that this void or this limbo we're almost in, where nobody feels like it's even worth being around. It's that hard.
Right.
And that's possibly what you're meaning.
Yeah, exactly. No, I get that too. And I mean, I get the same energetic also. It just feels like, yeah, you described it perfectly, actually. But to me, it is shedding the old skin, and it almost feels like the planet's being terraformed to some degree. And at the same time, we're all going through what I call the ascension process, which I feel is pretty much what we're experiencing. I mean, there's a lot of density and shifting and turbulence before the newer light consciousness really fully descends into the planet. But it's fascinating. The whole transition is really fascinating when you look at it from a higher perspective, for certain. And with that being said, also, I was going to ask you about your cases. When you investigate some of these cases, have you ever come across women who have been inducted or contactees that were pregnant, that had false pregnancies or anything like that?
I've got a whole chapter in my book about missing pregnancies, and it is a very big one for a lot of women, because many of them are aware that they've, or at least have been shown some of their children on board craft and have been taken up and asked to show them affection or to hold them or whatever. I even had one lady very aware that her role on the craft was to help with the human mums connect to these children that were which we would call hybrids. You know, they're a mix of both human and ET genes, and that is it sounds in some ways, you know, very confronting until we understand there's more going on than we realize around this whole program. And what even some of the men that have had genetic material taken, such as sperm, have been taken up on the craft and shown their children on board craft, even if they've got no children on the planet, human children, they may be shown their own children up there. One of the interesting things with all of that is getting understanding. And one way you can get understanding for them personally is to actually take them into hypnosis. And in that way, through their subconscious, superconscious, get a sense of why they have been part of that program, because it's really important people realize there's a bigger picture here. We understand things from a very limited perspective through our conscious mind. Our superconscious gives us a great deal more understanding of why we would be part of an experience like that. And what many of them seem to do when they go into their superconscious state or subconscious superconscious is they will see there's been some form of agreement prior to incarnating as human, where they would be involved in certain programs. And I would, you know, I check with them on a number of levels, you know, about the consensual thing and how they resonate to that information, all those kinds of things that give them an understanding of the bigger picture. And even though it can be very confronting to many of them initially, in the end, there's a part of them that just actually feels, resonates to it, which is often a surprise to them that they can even resonate to it. And there's one particular profound story of a lady who was probably the most profound, was where she felt her son had been taken. It was her third pregnancy. She'd been told by the doctor that she shouldn't go ahead with the pregnancy anyway because she nearly died through the second pregnancy with her son. But she hadn't made up her mind when she woke up one morning. The pregnancy was gone. The doctor couldn't explain it. There was just blood. There was no fetus. And then she kept getting flashbacks of this little boy in her mind, and she got very, very scared until her younger son said, "Mum, I've got a brother and he's on the craft and he wants to meet you." This freaked her out. She was absolutely terrified of what that may be. She couldn't even look at anybody's child or baby because of these flashbacks. And eventually I did a regression with her, and it was one of the most profound that I ever had. And what she told me in this regression was very profound. And she found out why her son ended up on the craft. And what we did was, when she saw the little baby being taken and put into a kind of incubator, and I said, now we need to know why this is going on. And she sees herself talking to this being, and she knows from the being, and she knows from her own doctor, that if she went ahead with this pregnancy, she would most likely die from it. And she realizing that, they're saying, look, you can choose to give him to us, but he'll have to stay on the craft. He can't come down and be with you. So you've got a choice. You either go ahead and you take the risk of maybe, ultimately not being around to be a mother to your two other children, or you can give him to us and we'll look after him for you. And the most profound part of that, and it had me in tears when I actually did this regression, she was saying from her recall of that, she said to the being, promise me you'll love him. Promise me you will love him as I love him. And the being obviously promised this. And the next thing, she is shown her son. And he's sort of not quite a teenager. And her whole face changed as she was being shown the very boy that she'd seen in her dreams. And he was just so delighted that finally she was prepared to acknowledge him. And from that time, she said, when she was writing books about her experiences, she said, if I ever got stuck, my son would come and he would help me. My son from the starship would come and help me write the story. So that was a really fascinating and very, very unusual understanding of what we call the missing pregnancy.
Oh, wow. Yes, it certainly is. And have you ever done regressions on people in between lifetimes before Earth?
Yes, and past lives as well. I find that they have been really useful in many cases, particularly if there's a fear of death, because what I've discovered is that if you can take them past the death sequence, one of the fascinating things to ask, which I think is really helpful when they've revisited a past life and they've experienced a number of different things, when they've actually moved from that into that super awareness, as they've finally left the life itself, I will ask them, what did you learn from that particular lifetime? And they would tell me, well, I learned more about compassion, I learned more about, being limited, or et cetera, et cetera. So the insight that particular life gave them and what they experienced, the superconscious insight was absolutely incredibly useful to them in terms of how they saw their life today.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah. And sometimes I would suspect they have more of a cellular reactivation sometimes with memories. Cellular memory just gets activated without being prompted. Is that correct? Or how does that work?
Well, it just depends. And again, I call that the soul journey. For some of us, we've chosen to be more limited in terms of what we remember in a lifetime. So for someone like myself, I have done past life regressions myself, but it wasn't conscious memory. Some people can get an insight into their past lives by looking at what they have been particularly interested in their lives. There's a particular country that they were drawn to, or particular types of occupation or whatever, often reflect a past life. But one young lady that was very profound for me was a young lady who remembered her past lives at 8 years old. And she told me that one of the ones that was most connecting to her was when she was an Izoni. And this is a purple skinned young woman, which was very, very human-like, but purple skinned. And she said that when she ever astrally travels, she goes into her Izoni form because it feels more comfortable to her than her human form. And there was a very interesting correlation between that and her mother, because she drew a picture of her life as an Izoni and her children as an Izoni. And this group of children, her mother, who's a scientist, actually looked at and became very emotional and said she couldn't work out why she was emotional looking at a picture with purple-skinned children that her daughter actually had drawn. And her daughter said to her, well, Mom, it's because you looked after them when I died, so you became their mother. And so you're remembering that time when you looked after them, and that's why you get emotional. The mother couldn't connect to that, but she still couldn't understand the emotion. And I did a regression with her and took her back to the planet where she was an Izoni too. And what was fascinating was, and if anyone wants any kind of proof that past lives can be a lot more tangible than you think, she again recognized these children in her regression, and she got very emotional again. And she said, one of them speaking to me in Izoni, but I don't understand. And I said, oh, yes, you do. Just go to that part of you that understands Izoni. And her daughter, who was actually part of the regression, was sitting there quietly, asked me in sort of gestures, could she speak to her mother? And I never do this normally, but it just seemed appropriate. And her daughter was speaking Izoni to her mother in her hypnosis, and her mother answered her in Izoni. So they were having a conversation in Izoni with the mother in regression, in hypnosis, with her daughter quite conscious, recalling her Izoni language, and they were actually having a conversation, which is the most bizarre kind of confirmation in a way of the integrity of that past life memory.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. That's really incredible. And how long do those regression sessions last?
Generally about 2 hours. By the time that you've done first of all, it's working out what somebody wants to understand or know, because we're putting that out consciously to not only to the conscious mind, but also to the subconscious, superconscious, so that when you take them into the regression, you've already laid the map out to where we want the superconscious or the subconscious superconscious to go. And then it's the origin of that particular information. Where do we go for that information? And the subconscious, superconscious will take you to the scenario or where you can access that information.
Mm-hmm. And is there residual effects after the session? Do people have more vision or insight, or what happens?
Well, certainly some do. What I usually put in as a suggestion is that they remember everything that is useful and helpful to them in their conscious mind. But I also do a recording so that down the track they can listen to that. And that will actually bring in more memory and recall. So it's, when they do one, it actually can be a facilitator for much more information down the track.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And have you ever run into any kind of problem with regression, anybody getting stuck or traumatized in a different space?
Actually, that's a good question, and it's a common one. What seems to happen most, if anyone really gets to a very traumatic part of a regression, there are two ways I can deal with that. One is to take them out of that experiential feeling of trauma so that they can view it more neutrally, in a more objective way, by viewing it, if you like, through a screen, so that they're not pulled into the emotion and the feeling. But if it's really difficult, often they'll just come out of the hypnosis. They will literally bring themselves out of it. They're not stuck in that. And no one has ever been stuck in that actual trauma. And then we will work with whatever that has brought up.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, that's excellent. And do you feel souls travel in groups?
Absolutely. I mean, you've obviously read, or I would think you'd have read Dr. Michael Newton's Journey of Souls, where he does all of this life between life regression, right, and talks about the monads and what have you. But also what I have seen and what I do in regression, if it's a past life, is when they may say they're sitting down having a meal in a past life, maybe it's in a medieval scenario, I get them to look at their family in that past life, and mother and father and brothers and sisters. And as I get them to look at their family, I get them to look at the eyes of maybe their father or their mother and say, do you recognize who that is? Even though the image may be different, they may say, oh, actually, that's my sister, or that's my dad in this present life, or that's my mother in this present life. So they will get a real sense that, they have been traveling with certain souls in each lifetime. And I have no doubt that we have certain soul groupings where we choose to work with those particular souls through different lifetimes in different scenarios. And this goes through and on, even though we may also interact with other souls in other family groups, as you like. It does seem to indicate that, at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, they say the eyes are the windows to the soul. And I've heard a lot of contactees mention how they recognize each other from ships or things like that. So there obviously is something going on with the experience.
Oh, very much so. The numbers of people that have come into a support group and been quite shocked because they'll have recognized somebody that they've never met before, and they'll say, how on earth do I know you? Sometimes they'll even get flashbacks to seeing them on the craft in certain ways. And it can be very traumatic, in fact, to suddenly walk into a room where there's a group of people and see someone and you know them, but you don't know how you know them, other than you've got a sense that you've seen them somewhere else.
Mm-hmm, exactly. I guess you could call them a star family then, or spiritual brothers and sisters on some level.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And with the families and these experiencers and these contactees, what is the lineage with the family? Is there anything with military or anything that would be more of a selection to or for an extraterrestrial contact?
Well, there certainly does seem to be a high percentage of people who have families have military backgrounds that seem to be involved in this. They'll say my father was in the military, or both my mother and father, or whatever, and they would be experiencers. Now, I'm not absolutely certain which way round this is, whether it's the chicken or the egg, or whether or not in some way the military have some way of pulling in people that have those particular awareness or abilities to start with, or it's they're doing something themselves to bring them into this whole scenario or not. I don't have enough information, other than there is a very high percentage of those with military backgrounds that seem to have these extraordinary abilities and what we'd call the starseed potential.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty interesting. And insofar as race goes, is there a particular race, sex, color, anything like that you notice more than others?
Gosh, it's not particularly. Mm-hmm. There seems to be, many that relate to what they call the Pleiadians or the Arcturians or the Orions or whatever it is. Some talk about coming from another part of the universe. One young man of 10 told me he came through a portal in the sun. So he was coming from a fair distance away. But what is still fascinating to me is when you've got children connecting to many non-human forms, such as this little 8-year-old that's family is manted, and that they are comfortable with that. And he talks about going on the craft and actually his soul evaporating. But he said it's like he evaporates or pixelates into the manted form for a time and then comes back to his human container again. So it's like they're quite aware that they can move as their soul essence from one container or one form to another. And this is, adults tell me, of course, the similar thing.
Wow. And how old was he?
He's 8.
Wow. Amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
That just blows me away, these little kids. I consider them little, but it's really interesting. They're old souls in little bodies. It reminds me of phase shifting a little bit, what you're describing, when they go from one container to another.
Yes, and the interesting thing he told me too, and I've heard this from a number of people, is that sometimes I think when they probably go more into their multidimensional vision, this little boy says sometimes at school he'll look at children, 1 minute they're looking human, the next minute he's seeing an ET with them. And whether or not he's able to access from some sensitive level, able to access their ET aspect or not, it's quite likely that they can do that. I remember a mother telling me of her 10-year-old son literally walking down the street one day and quite spontaneously started to point out the percentage of extraterrestrial genes in each person he was looking at. And he would say 20%, 80%, 68%. And it was really fascinating. His mother said, I didn't know what on earth to make of it at the time. But plainly her son could sense on some level this whole thing.
Wow, that's really, really interesting, the aspects. And that's a lot for a little boy to bear. That's a big cross to bear for someone to be able to see all this with multidimensional sight. And, of course, obviously, he probably doesn't tell a whole lot of people about it, especially at school, I would imagine, right?
Well, that was something that I remember saying to him when he told me about himself and a few school friends that go up on the craft sometimes. And he remembers being in a kind of cylinder where he couldn't move. And there were blue beings observing him. And I said to him, so what are you doing there? And he said, oh, it's our yearly medical exam. He was quite aware of why he was there, quite consciously. And I said to him, well, did you ever go and talk to your school friends and ask them if they remembered? And then he got very agitated and upset. And his mother, who's lovely, said, well, I told him not to. And he got quite cross because Mum told him not to. And she said, the reason was I didn't want him to appear strange to anyone or to, draw attention to himself, because we know what the judgment's like at school. So she'd actually prevented him. And he was quite annoyed about the fact that she'd actually prevented him from asking his school friends if they remembered too.
Oh, how interesting. Wow. Well, with that being said, we're going to head for a quick break, everybody, here at Dark Matter Radio Network. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm here with Mary Rodwell, and we're talking about star children. And Mary, you with me?
I am indeed.
Oh, excellent. And I wasn't sure if that was you shuffling in the background there or not, but it must be. I was going to ask you about the blood type. I know a lot of people mention blood types with star children and contactees. What's your impression of that?
I do think there's something in the blood types. I'm not sure, unfortunately, because, again, I don't have the data, which is really frustrating because, what these black ops know about that we don't know about means that we have to try and find it from other different ways. I do feel they can pick up certain anomalies or certain differences in blood types that suggest you're an experiencer. And I know this because a number of people have told me over the years that when they've had blood tests done and some of the things that have been looked into, there's been some odd responses to that. And one of them was actually an academic who asked her, she asked a friend of hers to actually look at her blood, who was able to do this, to check out the blood for her. And he got quite freaked out because he told her that he didn't want to look anymore because there was something, and she was mentioning there was something within her white blood cells that suggested something really strange and unusual, and it freaked him out, and he wouldn't go any further because she wanted him to look at her DNA as well. I do think there is things there that would certainly indicate starseeds, but we're not told anything about this.
Right. Yeah, that'd be interesting to get some more information on that, without a doubt. And also, what about implants? How many people have you communicated with that have implants, or do you know if they have implants, alien implants?
Oh, yeah. Implants are such a big, complex one. And most of the informed know about Dr. Roger Leir and his book, The Aliens and the Scalpel, where he'd removed a significant number and had them analysed and found all sorts of anomalies with different forms, from biological ones to metallic ones to silicone and whatever. There seems to be a whole range of different types. And some of them I don't think are ET. I think some of them are very much from our own species. And a lot of people are aware of, if they've had mylab experiences, that there may be implants there. Certainly some of them are seen on X-ray. They are extremely tangible. There are those that have implants, they believe, from the ETs. Tracy Taylor talks about her drawings and that she believes she's got an implant in her arm, but she doesn't see it as a negative thing. She sees it as something that actually assists her to translate or draw the particular unusual and very beautiful geometric art that she does. So, we're inclined to, look at implants as often from a negative perspective, when I think, in fact, sometimes that is not the case at all. And some of them also seem to be what I call energetic implants as well. And that is a very interesting one. And that is something where if I've got someone who feels they might have them and I want more information, what we do in regression is we scan the body. And as he or she scans the body, they will tell you where they are. And they will also tell you more about them, because the subconscious, superconscious can often, give you that information. And then whether or not they are something that they want to retain or actually remove energetically.
Right. That's very interesting. Yeah, I'm well aware of the etheric implant, etheric implants in general, and there is a way to remove those. Those are a lot easier to remove. And also, they've worked as stabilizers. I understand that sometimes those implants do stabilize as the light body consciousness descends into the physical body. So they are for good, and I agree with you on that one. And also, some of the other implants that I've done research on also have a radio frequency signal, and some are deep space. I'm sure you're familiar with that also. And others are actually air traffic control. And some of those, that's how you can tell the difference between off-world, maybe a black space program versus the underground. So it's very fascinating. And once again, that's a big, complex array of information. But I do think that we should focus on the positive side of implants, because so many people are loaded up with them. And I am one of them, so very clear on what they do and how they function. But my take is that you can learn to manipulate them and work with them on a higher level of consciousness so that they're not inhibiting you in some way.
Well, that's what you can do in regression, is actually find out whether or not this is still useful to you. And if it's still useful to you, then why would you remove it? Right. So the superconscious will know. And the superconscious can say, okay, at the moment, this is absolutely imperative that you keep this, but at a certain point, it won't be necessary. So you gain more information and you gain more control about what you understand with what's going on with you on different levels. And as you say, there's often a higher purpose that you're not consciously aware of.
Right. Have you ever done etheric implant removal? Have you ever tried to do that on a patient?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is something that I've done. And I also mention an exact, a very interesting one, my very first that I was sort of working from the seat of my pants with that one. And it's in my book, actually, in the chapter on implants. There is how I actually worked with this lady who had 5 and how she actually described them, and how she herself, with myself as the facilitator, not only did she get an understanding, but the time was to remove them. But what was fascinating was, although it went back and it appeared to be something initially quite negative, when we went into even more of the complexity of it, she went right back to a time in Egypt where she was the one that had actually done a kind of deal with these different beings to have those in this lifetime, and why she was having them. So in other words, she was literally the orchestrator of it all.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting how the timelines collide with these experiences. That's what I have noticed also. Even from my personal experience, it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had an implant removal done in the 90s, and I swear to you, it was like night and day after it was done.
Mm-hmm.
I felt so much lighter. So and that was the first, that was the etheric one. Yeah.
Yeah, she was amazing because there were two things that she complained of. One was that she couldn't meditate anymore, that something was stopping her from reaching those other higher levels of her connection to her spiritual self. But the other one was she couldn't even straighten up her head. She had it always on one side due to this implant on one side. And what was fascinating to me, and it was still, you know, I was still, as I say, running by the seat of my pants with this one. She left completely different. She was not only feeling connected to a higher spiritual self, but she could actually straighten her head for the first time in many, many months, which, you know, whatever you want to, however you want to judge that, the proof of the pudding was there for me. And it was a different woman leaving my, you know, my office. It was amazing.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I totally resonate with that information. I'm sure a lot of other people do. Where are the most star children cases reported across the planet? Have you noticed the location?
Well, I think they're happening everywhere, but unfortunately, because of the language barrier, it does mean that you don't get to know what's happening on some in the countries that have not got English as their first language. Although I am still getting, it's everywhere. What I asked this 9-year-old was, how many on the planet are actually starseeds? Now, this is a 9-year-old, and why I give the children so much credence is for two reasons. One, they don't read books on this, and two, they don't watch talk shows. So everything they're getting has an integrity and a purity that the adults, you know, unfortunately we lose. We do lose through coloring of the programming that we have and all the rest of it. And she told me this. She said 50% of the population on this planet now are starseeds. But she said, unfortunately, when they go through education, you know, various religions, all these other things that program us into the third dimensional reality, she said, many, she said, lose the ability to connect with their light. So only 20%, she reckoned, actually retain their light, as she calls it. So that's unfortunately what's happening now. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense to me, actually. And what is the age group of these children that you've been working with? What does it range from?
3.5 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Right through to, you know, teenagers and beyond. When you've got a 3.5-year-old, a mother wrote to me from Turkey. She said her daughter had actually drawn a strange script and had actually got I don't know whether she colored or painted a planet. Now, this script looks very similar to the scripts that many of my other clients do, right across the board, right from all ages. It almost looks like a kind of shorthand. Well, she had done this script and she'd done this planet, and her mother said to her, what is this? What have you written about? You know, what does it say? And what is this planet? And she said, that's the new Earth. And what I've written is about the new Earth. And this little girl was 4.5. And the mother said, and she said, can you tell me more about it? And the 4.5-year-old said to her, no, because it's a secret. Oh, interesting. Very, very interesting. It reminds me of somebody else I know who has a daughter like that. So yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah. It's unbelievable. Even with the children and the crop circles, there were two parents wrote to me. One was had a 3.5-year-old, and the other one I think was a 5-year-old, and both used the same term for the crop circles. The 3.5-year-old was obsessed. As soon as he saw a book on crop circles, he was obsessed. The mother said he pointed out certain ones and was absolutely insistent that she drew them. And she said he kept saying, draw this one, draw this one. So she was doing that, and basically he said the term, the scaries make those. which is exactly the same term as this 5-year-old said, the scaries make the crop circles. And also the scaries are the ones that take them up onto a spaceship. And he was actually describing that as well. But his obsession was with certain of the crop circles and with, as say, insistent that his mother actually drew some of them. So there are children as young as that are recognizing something in the crop circles and being aware of the intelligences behind them. You know, that it to me is absolutely incredible. Mm-hmm. Absolutely incredible.
It really is. And do these children look alike at all these different children? Like they could be related?
It does seem to be that a lot of them have these really amazing blue eyes. And it's almost like you can see that. I often look at children and especially babies. I'm the biggest sook around, as they say, when it comes to babies and children. It's something that I've always been really connected to is the little ones. And you can even see energetically with some of these small babies and small children, there's something about them. There's an awareness about them. There's a knowing, a kind of knowing there that they know far more than they're able to even articulate. And it's almost like, and somebody's going to think I'm crazy by saying this, but I actually sort of say hello to them mentally and say, you know, how are you? And good to meet you and whatever. And you get these little ones then suddenly with a bright beam on their face looking back at you. How much they get of that, I don't know. But it's something that I just feel there's something, you know, there's an energetic sense with some of them that there's something very special about them, and I feel it's connected to this energy of the star seeds.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, sometimes it's just the vibration alone that communicates. Yeah, absolutely. At what point do the parents realize their children are star children or even gifted? I mean, when do they start picking up that something's different here?
Often, even when they're really young, because they seem to be very advanced, many of them, they'll walk or talk really quickly or very early in their development. Some of them, you know, will, you know, vocalize sentences before they're 2, for example. They will be quite advanced. And they will also talk about some amazing, unusual things. 1 2.5-year-old, the mother told me, had seen this picture of the Indian god Ganesh, you know, the elephant god. Mm-hmm. Now, this little boy had no way of knowing who this picture was or was of or anything. But the little boy went up to it and pointed to it and said, Ganesh. And his mother said, how do you know? And his answer to her was, because I'm a clever boy.
That's cute. That's funny. Yeah, you have to wonder where they're getting the data, right?
Oh, absolutely. And when, you know, one mother told me her daughter's now 7. And she said at 3 she was drawing mandalas. This little girl her mother had my book, and in it is one of the strange scripts, the star script. And the little girl pointed to it, who's 7, and said, I can tell you what that says if you like. And so she actually translated it to her mother. And the mother contacted me and said, I said to the little girl, would you translate that for me over Skype? And she said, oh, yes. Do you want it in the language or do you want it in English? And I said, could you do both? And she said, yes. So she said it in the language. She then translated it in English to me. And I said, do you know the source of that information? She said, yes, it's the Greys.
Interesting.
So she not only spoke in the language, she translated it, but she also knew the source of it as well. And she was 7 years old, and she did this quite naturally over Skype to this strange lady who wanted to know about it.
My goodness. And what are these children doing now? I mean, what are they doing? Are they in school, or are they doing something special?
Well, some of them, obviously, the parents are aware that they're different. Some of them are homeschooling them as much as possible. There seems to be a big drive to homeschool because the children don't want to go to school because they understand what happens there. Some parents don't have a choice, so, you know. But the parents themselves are experiencers. So there is a sense that, you know, they have a knowing how to help their child and how to support them and to listen to them in many ways. Sometimes it's not the parents, but the grandparents who are experiencers that are open, but then maybe their child or their adult child isn't yet ready to acknowledge this, but they'll see it in their grandchildren and say, it's very hard for me because my daughter doesn't want to know about this yet, but I can see my grandson or my granddaughter is one of these children. What can I do to help them when the parents still are not awake?
Right.
And, so there is that dilemma sometimes when you've got someone in the family that recognizes it but doesn't know how to get past maybe the parents and still want to support their grandchild in some way. So it can cause quite a few problems.
Oh, I can imagine. You know what comes to mind is something like a starseed camp or something where kids can get together that have the same resonance wave.
Absolutely. And I think that that this will happen. I don't quite know how. In small pockets, it certainly will. And I do know in small pockets, there are families and parents that are aware, that are supporting these children or creating little workshops for them so they don't feel alone and that they can connect. And I'm very passionate about something like this manifesting in whatever way it can.
Right. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in a support system without a doubt, so they don't lose the momentum that they have, because there's so much creativity and so much what I call off-world intelligence. It's very fascinating. It's really incredible. And why isn't the mainstream addressing this more? Have you seen a surface with mainstream trying to approach starseed children?
Well, it's interesting that mainstream are, certainly some are looking at what they call the indigos children and realizing there's some difference there. And there are a number of teachers that have contacted me that are working in mainstream that are plainly starseeds and saying that they recognize these children in their classes and do their best to work from that other level with them. So, we have got teachers that are aware. How many? It's hard to know. Some of those teachers have had a hard time too, because if it's picked up in any way that they talk about anything different, or if they talk about even about, UFOs or any of those things, they can get a hard time. And I know a number of teachers that have had to be very careful about how they approach it. But certainly there are a number, and I don't have any numbers on this, teachers from various countries that have contacted me saying, I work with these young children and I know the star children. I they are able to energetically tap into the star kids and actually support them from a number of levels because of their own awareness. The same thing goes for a lot of nurses. I've come to the conclusion that so many nurses are starseeds. I did a workshop only a couple of weeks ago, and 60% of those in that day workshop were nurses. So it's interesting. And the midwives, some of the midwives say that, they've been starseeds and say, I'm here to help the delivery of starseeds, that they are aware that on some level that they can support a lot of these beautiful souls coming in that need that extra support and energy as they're being delivered. So it is happening, but it's still all on the quiet. There is nothing that's overt about it just yet.
Right. It'd be nice to see it come forward more full speed ahead anyway. And let's talk about your books a little bit. They are available on Amazon.com, correct?
Awakening is, I'm still writing to others at the moment. With Awakening, that one is now on an ebook as well for anyone that, doesn't necessarily need the hard copy. I am trying to get them translated into other languages simply because I am contacted from people all over the world, from as far afield as South America, from Poland to, the Middle East, to Asia and whatever. And it's interesting that they're contacting me from all these different places. And that tells me they must be really desperate for information, because they're resourcing, the English, which is not their first language, and yet connecting to the information that I'm putting out. So this is another confirmation that it's very relevant and it's global.
Yeah, it's like a universal experience, without a doubt. And so what are your books that you're working on right now about?
One is more of the bigger picture of the starseeds, from understanding this from the soul journey. Many of them remember coming in as a soul. They will actually describe even things that are happening in their own family before they actually, while they're still as their physical container is still in their mother as she's pregnant, but almost like the freedom of the soul before it actually comes into the physical container is actually recording things and being aware of not being physical, and actually sometimes having quite a struggle to realize that they are going into a form that maybe is really, really difficult. One of the things Tracy said to me, she was remembering me being without form and experiencing a vision of a small sphere appearing in the vastness. And there was a sensation, she said, I was connected to this sphere and observed a human hand reaching out from my consciousness to gently grasp this shining holographic blue sphere. This human hand now seemed to be connected, and the feeling and sensation of vibrations of this sphere, and this sphere ultimately bringing her into her human form. So it's really interesting that they have memories prior to actually being in their physical form as a small baby, and also mentioning sometimes as a small baby coming and going as a soul and traveling in this orb of light, which, you know, metaphysicians call the Merkaba.
Wow, that's fascinating. And of course, those orbs have nothing to do with the ones that people are photographing, right?
Oh, I think some of them are.
You do?
Okay. I do. I think some of them are certainly elemental spirits. There are some that are ETs, interdimensionals. Some of them are us as we're traveling astrally. The reason I believe some of them are us and is due to quite a bit of research. One of them was a regression I did with a lady who mentioned that her partner had kept seeing these orbs of light in the room, and he couldn't wake her up. And we wanted to know what was actually going on. And in regression, when he finally woke her up, he said he was really struggling because it terrified him to see all these lights in the room and what have you. And when she woke up, she didn't sound normal. And afterwards, we discovered that the lights that he was seeing in the room, one of them was actually her coming back into her physical body. So, you know, as an orb. So there seems to be, that is the way that we can travel. That's how spirits can travel. And also, I think other intelligences can travel in these different light forms, and maybe the different colors have an identity or whatever. And some of them are also, I think, ways to observe, you know, if we're being monitored or what have you. That's a kind of way to observe what's going on by, you know, the orbs in the room. I mean, lots of people particularly notice orbs when they're doing something very spiritual, you know, meditation, taking pictures, and there will be orbs around. And in beautiful, joyous energies, you'll see lots of orbs. When I was at ESETI, at James Killiland's ranch, it was amazing in the field of dreams where we'd all meditated, how I'd take pictures and the whole picture would be filled with orbs.
Wow.
It was like they were all there celebrating with us. It was just the most amazing. And you can call them in. I've done that. I've actually, I got a gentleman to have a camera, and I actually mentally called for one to come and show themselves. I couldn't see it, but when I felt it was there, I said, look, take the picture now because I think it's there. And literally a meter from my hand was this orb.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And I have seen a lot of pictures. It seems to me more and more people are taking photos of orbs. It seems to be very, I don't know if it's more popular. I don't know if it's that they're just noticing them more or that technology is kind of accelerated, where they're able to just whip out a camera. But yeah, that's fascinating.
I think that it is, technology is able now to pick up more of the multidimensional nature of our reality. And what is interesting to me is that if you get a camera that is too sophisticated, it actually blanks them out. So it's important not to get one that's too expensive to actually take orbs. In fact, the cheaper ones are better because they don't have the screens. And I was told this by a television producer who understood more about cameras. And she said, that's the reason, you know, these really flash cameras don't necessarily get the orbs, and you get them with the cheaper cameras because they don't have the filters. And so that's when you get them. But anyone can try it and pull them in. I've even had people take pictures when I'm giving a presentation, and there'll be a huge orb to one side or to the back of me or whatever. And it just says to me that, you know, whenever I'm giving a talk, there's the non-physical realm keeping an eye on what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's really nice. That's great. And when you define star languages, what is that? How do you define it? Star language in general.
My understanding of star language is that it is, some call it the language of light, the universal language. Some that, because there are so many different forms of this language, some believe it is part of their origins, or at least their recent origins, or their star family. Many say that they've learnt the script on the craft, because it's related to where they're from, and that's why it feels so normal to them. And many of them say that some of these frequencies are healing, accelerating frequencies as well. Interestingly, people can converse in it. That I've heard of a number of people conversing in star languages and understanding each other, but not all languages can be translated linearly. Some of them seem to be compressed files of information that, in other words, are actually in totality something that is felt and sensed rather than understood in a linear way.
That's very interesting. So do you think they can be translated into a machine language or code, or have you actually experienced or heard anything that contains numeric codes?
There are some that can be translated, but there are some that can't. And that's what I've understood, is that, in a way, the ones that can't be translated are more of a package of information. For example, it was described to me like this. If I say the word Christmas to you, it brings in a whole range of information just by that simple word Christmas, from, Christmas trees to Santa Claus to Christmas presents to everything that is aligned to Christmas. It's almost the same way with some of these languages. They bring in a package of information. And one lady said that even one little symbol, for example, from that language would fill this, my office with information like encyclopedias. In other words, that amount of information will be compressed in that one word or that one symbol.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I'm certain that I would suspect that some of these children are attracted to crystals, or they work with crystal. Is that true or no?
Absolutely. And they seem to have an intrinsic understanding of what crystals are relevant to what. And one of the young teenagers said to me that some of the crystals will be part of technology that will help clean up the pollution on this planet. So there's definitely a lot we need to understand about the potentials with crystals and what they can do. And I'm sure, actually, some of the covert agencies know this.
Due to technical issues, the connection to the guest had suffered some problems, and so we're going to fast forward into the interview and pick up where everything got better again.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio Network. And I'm here with Mary Rodwell. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, but we're back. And Mary, as you sound like you're better now, loud and clear.
Yes, it seems as though everything's fine again.
Okay, now my kitten's making a ruckus of noise, but that's okay. We're going to work through that. That's in the background here. So let's talk a little bit about the children being. You mentioned they're starseeds, but are they hybrids? Are they part extraterrestrial? Are they full extraterrestrial? What is the design behind the blueprint of a starseed?
Well, that's quite an interesting one, and I'm not quite sure what the differences are, other than the fact that Dr. William Brown, who's a molecular biologist, has actually says this about them. He says that he believes that genetic modification is occurring in utero, producing a new human, but he says the hybrids are altogether a new species. And then he talks about the exponential increase in autistic ADD indigo children. So he's basically saying that they're different programs, and that's how I understand them as well, each with different abilities or expanded abilities in different areas.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, I'm wondering about how much of that is actually people trying to dabble with genetic engineering. I talked about the transhumanism earlier on, but I know that they're trying to do a lot of tampering with the DNA. And I'm wondering how much of that is actually part of these starseeds, or maybe there's an alteration that's partial starseed and partial the manipulation they're doing on this world. Do you get that sense at all, or no?
Oh, they're doing the similar stuff. From my understanding of what's happening with the covert black ops and whatever, that they're playing around just as much. And I'm pretty certain they've cloned humans, and they've also brought in all sorts of mixed genetics to see what happens. And certainly the whistleblower testimony seems to support that.
Right, but the starseed in general, I think, is not able to be contaminated by, say, someone who's trying to play a mad scientist against the DNA template. Would you say?
I don't know, but I would think so. These those with the ability to do this from the star families certainly seem to be protecting their own as much as possible, and that seems to be coming over as well. That many of those that feel very connected to their star family seem to feel very protected by them in some way. And I think if they're important to whatever particular intelligence, then I think that there is a program of support and protection in many, many ways. And there's been a lot of evidence, even to having, somebody having a very dangerous life experience, whether or not they've fallen off a bridge or in a car accident, and somehow being protected and not having the injuries they would normally have if it had just, unfolded normally. I
agree with that. Yeah, there have been several times I came close to with that. So yeah, there are definitely beings watching over us, whatever you want to call them. Not a doubt. And obviously there are good ETs out there, and then of course there are some who have had negative experiences with quote-unquote extraterrestrials. And I'm wondering how much of that is based on the perception of reality from the observer or the experiencer versus actually a real negative ET. What is your impression of that?
I think it's a very good understanding, because I've certainly found with perhaps the 30% that have been, if you like, traumatized, when you take them into the experience, they've realized that what they feared has been more of the unknown rather than the known, because they may go up, see themselves on a craft having procedures done. If you don't know what those procedures are for, then you're going to see that as something happening for you against your will and is painful, etc. It's like the 2-year-old that you take to the doctor and you say he's a nice man, he's going to make you better, and the doctor gets a great big needle out and sticks it in the child's backside. The child's going to say he's not a nice man and I'm not going back there again. He may need to be 5 or 6 when you say what was in the syringe or in the needle was actually an antibiotic to make you better. So, sometimes our perception is very much out of fear and not knowing, rather than the fact that something really terrible ultimately has gone on, because often the procedures can be medical procedures to be healing and helpful rather than to be the opposite of that. So you're absolutely right.
Right. And have you noticed any of these contactees having any nightmares or anything like that where they're not able to sleep at night?
Often the not able to sleep at night is because they're aware they're going to be picked up and they're scared. So they don't want to be picked up. They have a sense that they're coming tonight. And so you will get those that will not want to go to sleep and will be terrified. And often, again, it's because they don't know what's going on and they get a sense that something's happened. And I often say to them, look, they've been picking you up probably for a long, long time. You're still here the next day. You've still got your arms attached to your body. You're still able to go to school or to work or whatever it is. So whatever they're doing, ultimately, you're still here. So it's trying to really, as much as possible, try and get a more balanced reaction to the fact that they're being picked up, Right. And also helping them by information and understanding of what's going on in terms of what does happen when they are actually picked up.
That's very interesting. And what about a screen memory? Like, is it possible that these people that are being picked up at nighttime, say, is that an activation of a screen memory? Maybe they're not really being picked up, but perhaps they're activating a screen memory? Or is it a real-time experience? What would you say about that?
From what I understand, it is been something that's happened. But I don't know enough yet to say that categorically. In fact, I don't know enough of anything to say categorically anything. All I can go on is over 2,000 cases of individuals, what they've told me about their experiences, and looking for patterns to help me understand more of what's going on. There is so much we don't know, Solaris. That is the problem, and very hard for a researcher. And anyone who thinks they've got the mandate on this is kidding themselves, because I just think that's a nonsense. Yeah,
there's so many levels to it. And it seems to me like everybody's experience is very unique and individual, even though there's a similar thread in the fabric of the experience. There's so much. It's so deep.
Absolutely. And I think that the only way you can understand it as the soul journey, that each soul comes in with a certain amount of awareness, and they are going to respond to their experiences uniquely, even though there will be similar patterns.
And also, there are a lot of people that come forward with these cases and these experiences. Then I'm wondering how many people are not coming forward that experience it.
It's absolutely the tip of the iceberg for sure. And if this young lady is right, this 9-year-old, then 50% of the planet is having things go on. And even the ones that are perhaps less awake and aware, the other 50%, my feeling is, truthfully, that we're all being affected by the frequencies entering this planet and triggering one another. So this is actually a species activation. It isn't just a few people here and there. That's what the conclusion I've come to.
And that would include animals and other.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And let's talk a little bit about your documentaries. What guided you to create these documentaries?
Well, primarily because of the material that I was getting so many beautiful images. People were drawing the scripts, those coming out with the languages. And it wasn't really being honored and validated in a way that seemed to be important to a lot of researchers, far more interested in bright lights in the sky, how big they were you with someone, what color was it, how many minutes did you view it, do you have a picture? Well, quite honestly, that really is such a small part of what really is happening. And it gets very frustrating when really it's about people being interacting with the intelligences that are actually, from these craft. That to me is the important thing, not whether or not you've seen, another cylindrical UFO or whatever. So, and the evidence of a reality is how people change. And when people say, well, where's the evidence? Where's a bit of the craft? The evidence is in the person that's had the experience, because they're no longer the same. You don't change out of a hallucination or a fantasy. You change when something real has happened to you. And when people start manifesting or drawing strange beings or writing scripts or coming out with languages or changing their whole diet and wanting to live in a more holistic way, what has caused that? That is evidence of the reality more than anything else I can possibly think of.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah, it's a DNA activation without a doubt. Yeah, on so many different levels. And hopefully more and more people will become activated to that level of consciousness. It'll be a beautiful world. What do you see down the path of this world right now? I mean, what do you see within the next 6 months to a year? Or what have the visions of the children, anything, that they've noticed?
Interestingly, this next from 2012 to 2017 seems to be a very pivotal time to many of the experiences that have contacted me. The 9-year-old actually gave me that period of time too. And it seems to be that's the transition. That's the time of a lot of changes. And some of them are going to be very challenging. There's no doubt about that, because when you're moving from one awareness and reality to another, obviously that's going to knock a lot of people sideways. But the bottom line seems to be that although it's going to be challenging and difficult, at the end of the day, there is something very new and very special and very hopeful. And when people say, oh, well, how do you know that? Why do you think that? The way that I look at it is this, that when you've got some of these, so many wonderful, amazing beings, in the form of children being born right now, to bring their gifts from wherever it is, from the cosmic intelligence, whatever name you want to give that, they're not coming here for a waste of time. Because I'm pretty certain they wouldn't bother to incarnate if they knew that it was all going to fall into a big heap and there was going to be nothing ahead of us. So I'm very hopeful, but I do know that, like with anything, the birth of anything, it's going to be painful. But ultimately, what have you got at the end of it? Something new, and I think very wonderful.
I agree with you. That's very well said. And do you feel like these contactees are permanently connected to these extraterrestrials?
Yes.
You do?
Absolutely. Okay. Many of them may be still trying to work out what is real, because they're in conflict with their third dimensional programming and their multidimensional awareness. And that's the conflict, why they contact me, because it's how do I manage my third dimensional world that tells me one thing and my multidimensional world tell me another. I mean, I'm working with a scientist at the moment that's had that very struggle, where his scientific mind is saying this can't be, yet he's seen the mantid beings, he's seen, orbs flying around the room. He sees all of this as well and saying, how do I manage this, Mary? And it is a process of integration between learning to manage, your third dimensional, feet on the ground, earth life, with that multidimensional aspect. And it's a process of integration and healing, which, is a process we're all having to go through once we acknowledge that this is part of our reality. And this is the shift that's going on this planet right now. And all you really need is people around you that help you and understand and aren't judging the way that you're processing that.
Oh, I so agree. Well, I think more and more people need to be aware of what's really happening here across the globe. And once again, we're getting ready to wrap this up. We have about 3 minutes left, plus or minus. But I wanted to thank you very much, Mary, for being on the show this evening. It's been a wonderful conversation with you tonight. And I appreciate you coming on board here to talk about the star children and the future and what's happening here with all this exciting DNA activation. And once again, let's tell everybody where they can get in touch with you if they want to contact you and your books and all that good stuff.
Well, just Google Mary Rodwell or Google ACERN.com.au, and all the information will be there, and how to contact me and my team is all available to you there.
Awesome. That's very good. And also, do you feel like the star parents will return? They'll be actually taken off planet at some point in the continuum?
I think that's quite possible, and certainly indications from people speaking to me have said similar things, that there will be a showing of some kind. When that is, who knows? But I can't personally wait. I think it's going to be really brilliant.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the children themselves won't be kind of, they're here for a while and then they go elsewhere to go beyond and start really training where they're supposed to be training.
Absolutely. That's more than possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me also. And of course, with that being said, there are star beings and people, not just the children, but also the adults too, who are star beings who've actually kind of, I guess, graduated from Earth to some degree, would you say?
Yes, I'm sure that's quite possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense anyway for me. So what do you feel, we have just about a few minutes here left, maybe even 1 minute actually. So I do want to thank you again. Let me just go ahead and run through this data real quick. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And I want to thank Keith for his magical work in the background. Okay, and make sure you stay tuned for, I guess it's the Mallard Report. So I didn't recognize that before, but I will. Okay, we're good. Anyways, I got lost. I got sidetracked here. Please join me next week with my special guest will be James Bartley also. And Mary, do you have any final words? Anything you just want to say real quick?
Oh, just thank you for doing such a wonderful job, because it's through you that people get informed. So thank you for everything that you do.
Excellent. Well, thank you too. And I appreciate it once again. I hope to have you back down the road in the future, because the work you're doing is so significant and very effective on so many different levels. And I will be in touch with you for certain and touch base with you. All right. With that being said, everybody, I want to thank everyone for tuning in again and have a great week.